on the basis of a protected category. We often get questions about why can people place ads on Craigslist or on in the newspaper that indicate they don't want HUD or no Section 8 or no county, right? Well, while that ad indicates a limitation or a preference, right? But the limitation or preference is not based upon a protected category, it's based upon someone's source of income. One of the things we do at trainings is we try to update people about the protected categories, about the changes in the law. There have been several attempts over the past few years to include source of income as a protected category, but currently it still is not. The protected categories that we covered under the federal and state law are the current ones, and source of income is not. So that's the reason why somebody made a distinction based upon someone's source of income, whether they receive assistance from government programs, Section 8. It's not, I was going to say it's acceptable. It's not illegal. It's not really acceptable, I mean, because you don't really want to advertise in any fashion that construed, and it doesn't just include newspapers and handwritten ads or eviction notices or newsletters, but it also includes verbal statements. And so things that you say that indicate a preference or a limitation based upon someone's protected category can get you in trouble, can be a violation of the fair housing laws. Also, you know, when people make statements, they talk during the context of doing business, and they say things that indicate someone's protected class, that, while, you know, it may be questionable as a discriminatory statement, but it also leads to the person feeling that they were treated differently. Like you could talk to an African, and you could be talking story with them, and you could be talking about how many children they have, and you think you're just, or you know, what's your background, where you're from, and all this kind of stuff. And then they're not selected. So they, in their mind, they're thinking, well, yeah, I was asked about how many children I have, and we had this kind of discussion. So they think that the distinction that was made was based upon their related status. So that's something that you want to avoid. You don't want to do that because advertising.
You don't want to come back?
Verbal statements. Okay, so here's some things that you do not want to do. These are examples of, go ahead, you have your microphone.
I actually had this question from one of our fair housing coordinators in an outer island. Said, hey, someone called and they said, is it discriminatory to say no Section 8? And like Jelani has said, well, it's discriminatory, but it's not necessarily illegal, right? And we just talked about sort of having a discussion with the person that says, you know, you really could be losing out on some great tenants, right? If you have this baseline discriminatory thing that you're doing, right? You have this baseline where you're saying, I don't want Section 8. You could be missing out on really great tenants, and you're also missing out on payments that are guaranteed by the government. So that's something to think about. So I encouraged her to say to the person, you know, let's think globally, let's think broad. This island that you're on doesn't have a lot of housing, right? There's a lot of people looking for housing, and we have governmental programs to support people. So she felt really encouraged by that, and I think she had a very positive conversation with housing providers. So just, you know, kind of think broadly, like if your family member were using a government subsidy and was looking for housing, how would you want them to be treated, right? Something like that.
Other thing to add to that is that source of income is not currently a protected class, but in some other states it is. And so the law changes, and then in the future, some of you may be advocates, some of you may be at the ledge and lobbying our legislators to enact the law so that even those with source of income can get housing opportunities. So keep that in mind, the law evolves, it changes.
Are any of the housing providers in the room involved in the Section 8 program? Do you receive tenants that receive Section 8? Yeah. And we do have a representative from the county Section 8 program here with us today. I'm not going to disclose who she is or where she is, but she is in the room. If anyone would like to find out more about the program, they can contact the county and do that. Okay, so, you don't want to say, females preferred, Japanese only. We don't rent to people with assistance animals because, you're really saying you don't rent to people based upon them having a disability, because in order to have an assistance animal under the fair housing laws, you have to have a disability. You cannot say perfect for a single, professional, or empty nester. What do you guys think about that? Why would they want to say that? Age, what else? Why?
Familial status.
Marital status, right. See, one of the things about advertising is also is that it's always going to add, the statement is going to be interpreted from the perspective of the reader, right? So you think that you're putting something that's neutral, but if somebody reads that and they get in their mind like, oh, I'm not welcome, it's not for me because I'm not single, or what do you mean professional, or empty nester? Get the point.
And let me just add an example. So, for example, this may not be asking you directly, or are you married single? It could be in another way. It could be a single woman goes to look at a housing, a place to rent, and then in the course of the conversation, they may ask like, are you the only person that's going to look at? Are you going to bring your husband later? Because I really encourage you that you bring your husband with you. You know, so those sorts of ways, they may not necessarily ask what's your marital status, but it comes up as a proxy for getting that marital status.
If you could write your question down, and we'll get to it at the question and answer period. Thank you.
And we love questions. We want to encourage it. It's just to keep the flow because we have a lot of material to cover today and to make sure we get to all of it. Thank you.
Okay, another area of discrimination in fair housing is retaliation. Now, retaliation is a very interesting word because we use it in the general vernacular. You think like somebody's trying to be vindictive or get back at you, but there's a legal meaning to it, and there are different legal meanings of retaliation, because there's retaliation under the Landlord Tenant Code, but it's different than what we're talking about, retaliation under the fair housing laws. Under the fair housing laws, retaliation is when you illegally subject a person to adverse treatment because the person exercised the right guaranteed to them by the fair housing laws, or they opposed discrimination, or filed a complaint, or made a request for an accommodation, or did anything that the law allows them to do. And because they did what they were legally allowed to do based upon the fair housing laws, then you take an adverse action against them, right? And what are some examples of adverse actions or retaliation? Evicting a tenant for reporting discrimination to a landlord, or filing a discrimination complaint with HCRC or HUD. Retaliatory or adverse conduct against a real estate agent who refuses an owner's decision to discriminate. See, that's interesting because people often think of the fair housing laws as just protecting applicants, residents, tenants, but it's not really true. It protects everyone and anyone involved in residential real estate. And we're going to talk about that a little later when we talk about harassment. It includes, employees to be free from being harassed by tenants. Okay, another example of retaliation: vandalism or violence directed against an individual for participating in a HCRC or a HUD investigation. We had a case a few years ago. It was on Oahu, and it was involving someone who had exercised their fair housing rights, and the respondent, who the complaint was filed against, didn't like that and decided to shoot the complainant's dog. So it does happen.
No, don't shoot my dog.
And in that situation, had to get the Department of Justice involved because they deal with situations involving violence and criminal activity. I had a case a long time ago when I was doing this work in the mainland, and I had a few cases actually where that were not only retaliatory and they involve violence, because the federal law it's pretty comprehensive in the way that it describes retaliation, and it talks about coercion, people being coerced or intimidated or threatened. And so I had a few cases. I had one case a long time ago involving a cross being burned, a woman's car was bombed, And another case involving a resident who had gotten physically abused by his neighbor because of his race. So these things happen. Okay, raising a tenant's rent for refusing owner's sexual advances. This year nationally, the theme of Fair Housing Month and Fair Housing Activities is Call HUD, because sexual harassment in housing is illegal. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on harassment in general and sexual harassment in particular. And we'll have a session on that this afternoon, because while over the last 2 years we've seen like about almost 500 complaints, cases of sexual harassment in the context of housing. And oftentimes, a lot of these things go unreported. So there's a big campaign between HUD, its partners, and the Department of Justice to raise people's awareness about harassment in the context of housing, sexual harassment, and how it can occur in different forms and fashions.
Okay, so in retaliation, I just want to add, when we look at the number of complaints that are filed in housing, last year the biggest area of protected category was disability. It was 44% of all of our housing complaints. The second largest category of complaints, 24%, was retaliation. So I want to emphasize that the second largest number of complaints filed in housing is retaliation. So let's say a person files a complaint and they're alleging discrimination on one of the protected bases that we discussed earlier. Even if they move through the process and ultimately through investigation, the executive director issues a determination that there is no reasonable cause, meaning based upon the evidence that was gathered through investigation, he believes that there is not discrimination in our law. Even if there is a no cause finding, if the housing provider retaliates in some shape or form, that person can come back and file an independent retaliation claim. So I want to also emphasize that part of it, because that frequently happens. And Jelani had showed the slide to say that one of the claims is that if you exercise any rights granted by the Fair Housing. So even if the person is coming to you as a housing provider, landlord, and is alleging that they're being unfairly treated, they don't have to use the magic words as, I believe I'm being discriminated against on the protected class of this, there's a violation of 515. So you have to listen to what someone is saying and sift through. If they're saying they're being treated unfairly, discriminated against, they may not have the legal terminology, but you need to think of that as sort of a red flag that's kind of glaring at you, and to sift through that. And what we see more often is sometimes there's eviction, retaliatory eviction, but the other, I would say, kind of big area of action by the landlord is where all of a sudden this person is now having multiple house rule violations. Maybe they did something, put something out on the line, never an issue, maybe there's a verbal warning. All of a sudden there's this onslaught of rule violation after rule violation after rule violation. That could be one area. Another area is that you're targeting that person by issuing house rule violations to them, but there are other tenants who are engaging in the same violation and they don't get a house rule violation. So these are concrete, real-life examples that we see coming in, and I want to share that so that these can be lessons for all of us to avoid that situation.
Keep going.
Record keeping.
So just to emphasize, I think Jelani talked about record keeping and documentation, because it not only helps our investigation when we're trying to gather evidence, but it also helps respondents. If there is a valid reason why they're issuing these violations of house rules, then you want to make sure you document everything. And once a complaint is filed in my office, there is an obligation to actually preserve the records until the investigation is over. And if the records aren't preserved, the effect is that an adverse inference can be made if the records aren't kept. And basically it's because if the records supported your position, then you probably would have kept it. And if it disappears, then it's probably a good reason that, maybe they didn't support the position. So that rule can be found in Hawaii Administrative Rules 1246-304 and C and D.
For another movie.
So after the
I don't know why landlords make it so hard to have assistance animals like my dog Alex.
My last appointment, the building manager was a real problem.
When you have access to so much information, you have the responsibility to be very careful how you use the information and share that information with clients in the MLS.
Hello, I'm Sandra Ortiz. Welcome to this edition of Housing Point. Today, we'll be discussing the Fair Housing Act in honor of its 50th anniversary in 2018. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act on April 11, 1968, just days after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Dr. King was the country's most notable proponent of fair housing, marching in the streets of Chicago in 1966 to end the years of housing discrimination experienced in communities across the country. The Act currently prohibits discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, and national origin. In honor of the 50-year milestone, we'll address ways that the Fair Housing Act protects real estate professionals and your customers, and to help you navigate your responsibilities under the Act. We'll also look at how the Fair Housing Act addresses harassment and retaliation in the housing context. Finally, we'll review the best practices for criminal background checks of housing applicants. Our first story profiles a veteran who has an emotional disability and wants his assistance animal to live with him. Many landlords still aren't familiar with the Fair Housing Act's requirement that housing providers accommodate tenants who require assistance animals. Horace Miller reports from Chicago.
Philip, a Marine veteran, is joining me today along with his assistance animal, Alex. Philip and Alex have been a team for 6 years. After serving tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Philip was wounded and developed post-traumatic stress. Now Alex helps him get through some very difficult days and nights.
Alex is a part of me. I really can't imagine life without him. Somehow, he always knows when I'm having a bad time. Like last night. He woke me up so I didn't start having a nightmare. And before Alex, I would wake up thinking I was in the middle of a firefight. Not anymore. He's the one thing that keeps me calm.
And your doctor suggests you benefit from an assistance animal like Alex?
Correct. My VA doctors have eliminated most of the medications I used to take since I started using an assistance animal. One of my doctors even said, my dog is the best medicine for me. But try telling that to some of these landlords.
Landlords and building management need to be aware of the law. They are required to accommodate people with physical or mental disabilities and permit them to have an assistance animal, even when a building has a no pets rule. If a tenant with a disability makes a request for an exception to the rule, building management must accommodate them. Unless there is a threat to the health and safety of others,